Okay.
Okay, I am going to go ahead and begin. You didn't find it, Melissa?
Not yet. I'm still looking. I'm doing a search.
It was 2 days ago.
Okay.
Okay, yep, I found it. For some reason it's in my trash. Who
Mm.
knows? Okay, so let me pull that up.
Okay.
Okay. Set the phone.
Okay, let's see.
Okay, so I am going to go ahead and begin class. It is being recorded, and so I can share this recording with you tomorrow when it's finished processing. And then in the event that there is anything in here that you feel like you need to rewatch, then you'll be able to get the recording for that. And so thank you all very much for signing up, and I hope you enjoy class. It is a 2-session class. So on your handout, you've got homework between this class and next class. And then you will submit that homework to me, and then I'll look at it and share it with everybody in class next session. And then that way you can get a little bit of homework in between the 2 sessions. So thanks once again for coming. And what we're going to do in this class is neither one of you has set your camera up yet, but on the top of your camera, I want you to set it to the M mode, M as in Mary. Now, don't set your autofocus to M or anything else. I just want you to set your camera to the M mode up on top. And what the M mode means is that you are totally in charge of what your camera does now. Your camera is not going to do anything automatically for you. And what I'm going to do, both of you have your handout now. So if you'll look at your handout, you'll see that we're going to cover 4 things tonight. And what we're going to cover is your light meter and how you set that and what that does. We're going to cover your f-stop and what that means. We're going to cover your shutter speed and what that means. And then we're going to cover your ISO. And so Richard, right now, just kind of stop fiddling with your camera for just a second, and you can just pay attention for right now, and I'll let you fiddle with your camera in just a moment. So by knowing the light meter, the f-stop, the shutter speed, and the ISO, then you can photograph anything, absolutely anything you can photograph. And so if you don't know light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, when this macaw flies by you, you can't tell the macaw to please wait so that you can get your act together with your camera and figure out how to take the picture. The same thing when this lioness raises her head out of the grass, she's not going to wait for you to get your act together and learn how to use your camera. And so if you learn all of these things and get them down, light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, then when that tall-masted sailing ship goes by you in Venice, then you know exactly which one of those 4 things is going to help you get the photo. The same thing with this Milky Way photograph. Simple and easy to do, very, very simple to do, but you have to know whether it's your light meter, your f-stop, your shutter speed, or your ISO that needs adjusting to get the shot. And then once you learn this, then you're going to be able to freely, when you see something like cute little kids across the table from you, you're going to be able to take the photo without having to make a big deal out of it, without the kids knowing what you're doing. And then once you learn that light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, then you can start getting more creative, do it like, the cars in Cuba, or we've got an eclipse coming up in 2023. So you'll be ready for that. Or if you do something as spectacular as the Milky Way, you'll be ready for that. And so it's simply a matter of learning those 4 things, your light meter, your f-stop, your shutter speed, and your ISO, and when to move one and when to not move the other one. And so that's what we're going to work on in class. So you can do spectacular photographs when you know how to use this camera, or you can do something as simple and goofy as crystal ball photography. I've got a class coming up in crystal ball photography next week. If you don't own one, they're a heck of a lot of fun to take pictures through. Or if it just means that you want to take a picture of your cat, then it's still the same basic components: light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. So that's what I'm going to teach you today or tonight, and how also to use your camera. Because Melissa, you've got the 60D, right? The Canon
Correct.
60D, and then Richard, you've got the Nikon Z50 or Z60, Richard?
It's Z50.
Z50, okay. So you all are using two different cameras, but they all function exactly the same way. So this is all we're going to do in this class, is learn how to use this camera in the manual mode. And then next time I'll talk to you about some of the automated modes and which ones we want to use and which ones we don't want to use. And then future classes that you take from me are always going to go back to these four basic components, build on them, and teach you a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. Okay? So tonight is going to be a little bit technical. So tonight is going to be a little bit on the aggravating side, and also because neither one of you has set your camera up, and so you might be hunting for things that you might have already found. And so it's, since there's only the two of you so far, there should be one other person coming in, then hopefully it won't be too aggravating. Photography is technical. It is not creative until you master the technicals. So tonight I've got you on the road to mastering the technicals. So that's what we're going to work on. Next class, we'll work on a little bit more of that. And then from there on, you can start working more on the creative stuff. But right now we got to get the technicals down. Okay. So both of you on the back of your camera have a flip out screen, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
And it is much, 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 much easier to use this if you flip your screen back. So flip your screen back against the body of the camera so that the shiny part, the screen, is facing out. And that is much easier to use than flipping your screen out and trying to hold these big cameras, because you've both got big cameras like you would if it were a small point and shoot camera. So you flip your screen back so it's flat up against the screen. Also, so we don't use the cameras this way. Also, up at the top of your viewfinder, there is a small lever on Richard's camera, and there is a small knob on Melissa's camera. This is called the diopter. And so you push your shutter button down, you turn your camera on, you push your shutter button down, and then you look through the viewfinder. So go ahead and do it. Look through the viewfinder. And when you look through the viewfinder, rotate that little tiny diopter or move that little tiny lever until the numbers through the viewfinder are clear for your eye prescription. You see the numbers through the viewfinder?
Yep.
Got it?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay, now you hand that camera to somebody else right now, and they're not going to be able to see through the viewfinder. And that's because you've now set that diopter for your eye prescription. Okay, so that's a really important thing. And now you can see through that viewfinder nice and clearly. Brenda had this camera, so we don't need to talk about this camera. Melissa, you've got the 60D, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you're on the manual mode right up here on the top of the camera. And then on your back display panel, if you push this info button right here 3 times, you get a screen that looks like this. So you push that info panel 1 time, 2 times, 3 times.
Okay.
And then once you get a screen that looks like this, push the Q button. And the Q button activates one of these items on the back display panel. And now you can move between each one of these items on the back display panel by pushing this toggle right here. Or you can rotate the dial or rotate your front dial. You see how that works?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. And then you notice that you have a little lock button right down here. And you want to leave that unlocked. You don't want to lock this back dial, because if you lock that back dial, it prevents you from doing a lot of your camera functions.
Okay.
Okay. Got all that so far?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Now, I also want you to rotate your back dial until you see a 5.6 right up here on this display panel.
Okay,
So
got
take
it.
the back dial and you see 5.6?
Mm-hmm.
Yay! Okay, you can sit there and relax for just a second. Richard, I don't have a picture because I didn't know what camera you were using. So I don't have a picture of your Z for you to help you out. But you should also push, I think you're going to push your I button if I'm not mistaken. or-
Right, it brings up set control picture, and then it just kind of toggles back and forth.
Okay, and you have some sort of a display panel that looks similar to this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, super, super. Okay. And then you have one dial in the front and one dial on the back of the camera,
Right, one of them,
one for your finger and one for your thumb.
well, one of them is the aperture and one of them is the shutter. The
Good.
shutter is in the back and the aperture is in the front.
Good. So on the aperture, I'd like you to set that to 5.6 also.
Oh, I'm so used to looking at it.
You can look through the viewfinder. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's the same way I use my mirrorless. I look on the viewfinder all the time.
Okay.
I'm going to scoot through some cameras that are not in this class. I left them since I didn't know what you all were using, just in case we needed them. Okay. So you've got 5.6 set on there, Richard?
Right now I'm trying to clear it from the menu that it's on there. Okay. Oh, shoot. Okay, let's escape. Come on, come on. Okay, now let's see. Okay, yeah, I got 5.6.
Super. Okay. Now, both of you, I would like you to look through your viewfinder one more time. And when you look through your viewfinder, do you see a little scale down on the bottom in the middle that looks a bit like what I'm showing you on the screen? You see that little scale?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Is that what you're referring to as the light meter?
That's your light meter, exactly.
Okay.
Melissa, you see that little scale?
Yes.
Okay, super. Now, put your cameras down because I need to explain to you what your light meter is. So it's this little scale, and it's just simply showing up in the bottom of the viewfinder, and it's saying, if you'll put me in the middle, like you see it in the middle right now, just the little bars just right in the middle, it's saying, if you put me in the middle, I will in turn give you a perfectly exposed image. So your light meter is simply a guide to get you to the proper exposure. If you get to the proper exposure, then the light you see with your eyes looks just like what you're going to see on your finished picture. So that light meter is trying to guide you to a properly exposed image. If you were on program or if you were on the auto mode, then the camera would set itself, but that's not where we are anymore. You're in charge of this. So you're going to get the proper exposure. Now that light meter looks very simple, but really it's pretty complicated. So now we need to go under the hood for just a minute and let me tell you what's happening in a part of your camera that you can't see. So you have a light meter gadget inside your camera, except you don't just have one, you have 3 to 4. And so your light meter inside of your camera is a light meter that you can't physically see, but I'm going to show you where the icon is in just a moment. So a light meter used to be in the 1950s, this handheld device that like my father would hold out in front of him, and then he would look at it, and then he would go back to the camera and set the f-stop and the shutter speed on the camera. So we don't have to do that anymore because in the 1950s, the engineers put your light meter inside of the camera box. So inside the camera box is the mechanism that my father used to hold out in his hand. The first light meter that the engineers put inside the camera box in the 1950s was called a center weighted light meter. And if you look at your handout, that's the first light meter that I've got on your handout. The center weighted light meter simply takes all of the light in the whole frame and it averages it. So it takes that real bright area up where the sun is, and it takes that real dark area down where the shadows is, and it just averages all that light. But what happens if you mix white paint with black paint? What color do you get?
You're gray.
Gray, exactly. And that's pretty much what a center weighted light meter does. It just kind of mushes all the colors together. So you don't get anything that's super precise. You get something that's okay, but it's not super precise. So for the center weighted light meter, this is, since it's the oldest light meter that we have by Nikon and Canon, neither Nikon nor Canon is putting a lot of technology into that center weighted light meter. And so this is the light meter we do not set on our camera. And then in the early 1980s, late 1970s, engineers gave us a brand new type of light meter. And this is called your spot meter for Richard's camera, Nikon. And Melissa, on your camera, it's called your partial meter. Nikon got to the patent office first, so they got to call it spot. Canon had to find another word for it, so they called it partial. So that's just the way things go in the corporate world. The spot or the partial light meter reads the light in a completely different way because it only reads the light in this circle right here. It ignores the sun, it ignores the shade, and it only reads the light right there in the center of the frame. That's the only light that it reads. So the center weighted light meter, when it came about back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, was revolutionary because it meant people like me at the time could photograph things that were fairly complex. So we were able to photograph some complex lighting, but in a new way to do it. So for instance, if we had a performer on a stage in a spotlight, so the back of the stage is all dark, the performer in the spotlight is being totally, really bright for us. If I put the center of the camera on that performer in the spotlight and dialed my f-stop in and dialed my shutter speed, put that scale that I showed you right in the middle, now my exposure would be set for that performer in the spotlight, and my photograph of that performer in the spotlight would come out perfectly exposed. At the time the spot meter came out, I was a baby photographer working my way through college, and I was taking baby pictures in Kmart and Walmart. We started photographing children against solid black backgrounds and children against solid white backgrounds. But by putting that spot meter on the kid's face and dialing in the f-stop and shutter speed based on what the kid's face was, then the kid's face came out perfectly exposed and that background stayed black or that background stayed white. So we could now photograph things against a very, very bright background or a very, very dark background and get an exposure on that thing. Me as a nature photographer, that means I could photograph a hawk on a branch against a beautiful blue sky. And if I put that spot meter on that hawk and did the exposure based on the hawk, then the hawk would come out perfectly exposed, but the sky would either go light or dark depending on what color it was based on the hawk. Prior to that, with the center weighted light meter, my hawk would have been a silhouette because the sky is so bright in a photograph. So spot meter allows us to photograph something that's up against a very, very bright background or a very, very dark background. So on your handout, if you want to, you can write down next to your spot meter that we might use that about 1% of the time. So just in regular old ordinary shooting, you and I might switch over to spot meter maybe 1% of the time. And I'm going to show you how to do that after I'm finished with this. But then in the 1990s, with autofocus cameras, engineers started developing a new type of light meter. And it reads the light in this segment and averages it. this segment and averages it, this segment and averages it, this segment and averages it, this segment and averages it. So it reads the light in various segments and then averages it inside each segment and then averages it even more than that. So Richard, for your camera, this is called your matrix light meter.
Right.
Melissa, for your camera, this is called your evaluative light meter. And both of you are using pretty new cameras. Richard, your camera's a bit newer than Melissa's, but both of you are using really new cameras. So instead of 5 segments, your camera might be reading 64 segments and then averaging inside those 64 segments. And then your cameras even know that this is a really bright area up here, and this is a very dark area down here. So your light meters right now in these cameras that you're working with tonight are very, very smart. And so that's your evaluative or your matrix light meter, okay? Matrix for Richard for your Nikon, and Melissa, this is your evaluative light meter. So this is a light meter where I want you to stay. So if you look at the back of your camera real quick, that back display panel that I gave you, or if you would, Melissa, look on the top of your camera where you've got some buttons. See where you've got those 3 or 4 buttons up there?
Mm-hmm.
So you might have it up there, but I'm not positive because I can't remember the top of that camera. So Melissa, on the back display panel, you're looking for a rectangle with the parentheses and a dot in the middle of it. And Richard, for you on the back of your camera on your display panel, look at your display panel, Richard, not through the viewfinder, look at your display panel.
Okay.
And you're looking for a rectangle, an icon that's a rectangle with 5 segments in it.
Okay, you're talking about the matrix or
Yes. Yes.
yeah, I was looking at it.
Okay, so I want you to be set on that. And Melissa, I want you to be set on the evaluative light meter.
Okay, hang on. I'm still looking for it.
And
And
it
you
should
said it was a rectangle with what in it?
rectangle, a dot, and some little
Oh,
parentheses.
there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it?
Maybe. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah. So you want it on what now? Evaluative?
Evaluative, exactly. So both of
There
you,
it
when
is.
you
Okay.
find that icon and you highlight it with your toggle, then you can punch in your set button or your center button on your toggle, and then it allows you to make the change. But for right now, I want Richard to be on the matrix light meter, and Melissa, I want you to be on the evaluative light meter. So
Okay.
we're going to stay on that light meter 99% of the time. So there's really not only a rare instance when you might change that light meter mechanism. Now I can equate this light meter with down on the center console of my car. I have this button that I can push and I can go from sport mode to comfort mode to, I have about 5 modes I can drive in, and I never change it because I don't know what the different modes are. So your evaluative or your matrix light meter is kind of exactly the same. We only need to set it one time, but yet we should know what happens if we set it someplace else. Because look at the screen and let me show you what happens if I set the light meter in a different way. So when I took this picture, I was using my evaluative or my matrix light meter. It's reading all of the light. And so it's just, reading in different segments throughout the entire frame, putting emphasis on whatever it's designed to do. And then I did one other thing, and I'll tell you about that next lesson. I won't tell you about it right now, but I did one other thing. So this is my evaluative or my matrix light meter. If I pushed the button and rotated to spot or partial, Richard, it's spot in your camera, and Melissa, it's partial in your camera. If I pushed the button and rotated to spot or partial, this is what my picture would look like. Because this is what I saw with my eye. And what I'm telling the camera now is perfectly expose this center portion of the frame. So the difference between these two photographs is that the one on the left was taken with the evaluative matrix light meter, and the one on the right was taken with your spot or your partial light meter. So you're trying to get the exposure right in the beginning, but if you have the wrong machine set, then it's going to balance in the middle. The camera's going to look like it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, but your picture's not going to look like you want it to, okay? Because it's all in how you're telling it to read the light. So the picture on the left, I've told it to read the light in various segments and average it. The picture on the right, I've told it just to read the light right in the center where the sun is and perfectly expose that. So you have to tell the camera to read the light the right way. Otherwise, it's not going to do what you want it to do. And you can see from the two pictures that the sun's going down, and that's just because this is the most boring Gulf Coast sunset I've ever seen, and I am not getting the picture that I want because there is nothing happening. So that's the reason. So I'm sitting there playing with my camera, trying to do anything I can. So when you look at a picture like this or something like this and you want to take a photograph of it, then the first thing you've got to ask yourself is my evaluative or my matrix light meter going to be able to handle this? And if you think, because this barn owl's got this really, really white face against this very, very dark background, if you think, this isn't going to work, I probably need to go to my spot meter, then you know now to push the button, rotate the dial, and Richard, it's called spot in your camera, and Melissa, it's called partial in your camera, okay? And then both of you then will see a circle in the center of the frame, and that now tells you where the light meter is reading the light. But most of the time, 99% of the time, you are going to be able to leave your camera on your evaluative or your matrix light meter. So when you look on the back, you can see the little icon, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So get used to looking at that camera, especially the first time you take it out of the bag each day, or the first time you go out to shoot if you haven't used it for a couple of weeks. Get used to looking at the back of the camera and going to that icon and making sure that you've got your matrix or your evaluative light meter set. Got it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Okay, now let's put that scale right in the middle. So you can put your camera down for just a moment and come on back to me on the screen. You all can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
didn't ask you all about that, so I was hoping you could. Okay. Okay. So when you look at this picture, excuse me, erase that phrase. We're going to balance your light meter with two things. One's called an f-stop and one's called a shutter speed. So first, I'm going to teach you what your f-stops are. And so if you look at this picture of this malachite butterfly on this bleeding heart bloom, you'll notice that the background is totally soft. You see that? You see how it's all blurry back there? And you notice also that back in the back, some of the flowers are blurry and some of the leaves are blurry. You see that? And that's by design, because the human eye looks at everything that's in focus in a photograph, and the human eye ignores everything that is out of focus in a photograph. So when somebody looks at your photograph, they are going to study everything that is in focus. So what you're doing is you're drawing their eye to what you want them to look at and what you want them to see in your photograph by making sure that that subject is in focus. So the human eye looks at everything that is in focus and it ignores everything that is out of focus. We do that in focus, out of focus through this thing called an f-stop. And so we're going to design our photograph to make sure that it has what we want to be in focus and what we don't want to be out of focus. So all that tan stuff back there, what do you think it is?
Wall.
Wall?
Well,
Wall? Yeah. Well, it's the gravel in the parking lot.
oh, I
So-
see.
So if whatever it is, if you'd recently been shopping for gravel, and now I'm showing you that gravel in the photograph, now your eye is going to leave my butterfly that I'm trying to get you to look at, and your eye is going to get drugged back to that gravel, and you're going to be going, yeah, that's the color gravel I was looking for. I couldn't find that anywhere. And so your brain is totally gone, which means that my viewer isn't looking at my photograph anymore. My viewer is totally distracted by something else. So I am going to, or we are going to set our f-stops based on how much we want to show the viewer in the scene and how much we don't want to show the viewer in the scene. So would you grab a piece of paper and flip it over to a blank page or a blank piece of that paper? Flip over one of those pages maybe. And then I want you to draw something for me. We're going to use this to write for a while, and you're going to draw some diagrams. So I want you to draw a straight line, a horizontal line across the paper, and a vertical line across the paper. If you notice, it's a graph. And then give yourself some room to write down here. So when you're drawing your lines, give yourself some room to write, and give yourself some room to write over here also. So down on the bottom, you're going to be writing, and over on the left, you're going to be writing. So down here on the bottom, I'd like you to write these numbers for me. 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. So your numbers are 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, and 22. And then up against your vertical line, you're going to write 500, 250, 125, 60, 30, 15, 8, 4, 0.3 with quotation marks, and 2 with quotation marks, and then the word bulb. Okay. Now these numbers down on the bottom, 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32, these are called f-stops. F with a slash and then the word stop next to it. So if we were out shooting together and you said, Kathy, what f-stop should I use? I would say 5.6. If I asked you, Richard, what f-stop did you use on that picture? You would say F22, okay? So if you look at your picture on your computer in one of the Adobe products like Photoshop or Lightroom, you can open your picture and it'll show you that you used a 4.5 or it's F16. So these are the numbers that you and I talked about. These are the numbers that we communicate with our f-stops. And these are also the numbers that you would be looking at through your viewfinder. So you're looking at your picture, you're deciding how you want to design it, and you would choose to use a 5.6 or a 6.8 or a 16 or something like this. So these are called f-stops. These are the numbers you can see on the back of your camera, and they're also the numbers you can see through your viewfinder. What you cannot see through your viewfinder or on the back of your camera is inside your lens. And inside your lens, there is this thing called an aperture. And it's an opening that gets bigger and smaller and lets light come through it. So it's inside your lens. And your aperture at 2.8 is really, really big. So draw yourself a nice big circle under your 2.8. So if your lens had a 2.8 on it, you would have a really wide aperture or large aperture that's letting a lot of light through. And then at 3.5, that aperture would get a tiny bit smaller. At 4.5, the aperture would get a tiny bit smaller. 5.6, the aperture would get smaller. 6.8, it would get smaller. 8, it would get smaller. 11, it would get smaller. And I suspect you can figure out what's going to happen. 16, it gets smaller. 22, it gets smaller. And 32, it becomes a pinprick. So you can't see this. It's happening under the hood once again, but it's happening inside your lens. And then also what you cannot see, and if you have not figured it out yet, I'm a big advocate for knowing what's happening behind the scenes. So I'm pulling the curtain back on what's happening behind the scenes. So what's happening also behind the scenes in something that you can't see either is you have this thing called depth of field, DEPTH -of-field. And what happens when the light from the lens or from the sun or the subject comes through your lens, and that light goes through the convex and the concave pieces of glass inside your lens, and then it goes through the aperture opening. That's where your depth of field happens because of the physics of light traveling through glass and through an aperture. So when you're at 2.8 or your f-stop, you've set your f-stop for 2.8, you have a really big opening that you can't see in your lens. What you also cannot see is that you have about a 1/16 of an inch area that's in focus. So underneath that 2.8 and underneath that big, huge circle that you drew, draw a 1/16 of an inch, just a little line. And when you go to 3.5 and that aperture gets a little bit smaller, guess what? You get a little bit more area in focus. So now draw a little line that's about 2/16 of an inch. And when you go to 4.5, your aperture gets smaller, but guess what? Your area in focus, your depth of field gets a little bigger. So draw yourself a little bit longer line. And when you go to 5.6, more stuff is in focus. And when you go to 6.8, more stuff is in focus. And under 8, draw yourself a nice, thick, bold line. Because there's an old saying in photography, F8 and be there. Put that camera on F8, most stuff will be in focus. We won't have a blurry background, we won't have a blurry foreground, but most stuff will be in focus and they'll be happy. What's program mode do? It puts you on F8. What's the auto mode do? It puts you on F8. So F8 is kind of where most stuff's in focus, but you're never going to get anything that's just dynamic because most stuff's in focus. But really you have some stuff in the back that's blurry, but not really. And you have some stuff in the front that's blurry, but not really. And then when you go to F11, you get more stuff in focus. And 16, you get more stuff in focus. And 22, you get more stuff in focus. And under 32, make the infinity symbol. Because if you set your camera for F32, then from the first thing that you can see through your lens, through your viewfinder, to the mountains in the background, everything's going to be in focus. So Richard, you said you liked photographing landscapes. So if we want a grand landscape where everything's in focus, then we would set our f-stop to 22 or 32. But you notice how these are a bit confusing. 2.8 is a small number, big opening, small depth of field. Do you see that? So the way you can remember this is at 2.8, 2 things are in focus. And at 32, 32 things are in focus. So the bigger the number, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller the number, the less stuff is in focus. Okay? So that's how you can remember f-stops. If you want a lot of stuff in focus, then you set your f-stop to 32. If you want just a little bit in focus and you want blurry in the front and blurry behind, then you set your f-stop down in the 4.5 or 5.6. If you want most stuff in focus, set it on f8. So when you're looking at your photograph, you have to decide, how much do I want to show the viewer and how much do I not want to show the viewer? How much do I want to have in focus and how much do I not want to have in focus? Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Melissa, you got it?
Yeah, no, I have it. I was just thinking, how do you know what you want to focus on? Is that coming?
Pardon?
I said, so if you have just a few things you want to focus on, how do you tell it what to focus on?
So we'll get to your focus in just a second, but you would
Okay.
set your f-stop on like your 4.5 or your 5.6.
Right.
Yes, I've got you both set on 5.6 right now. But you'd set your f-stop down in those small numbers. If you want a lot of stuff in focus, then you'd set your f-stop on your 22 or your 32 or your 16. Okay. So that's what your f-stops are. So when you're balancing your light meter, you have to first look at your scene and ask yourself, how much do I want the viewer to see and how much do I want the viewer not to see? So in this photograph of the statue, I focused on the face of the statue. And then the hand is out of focus, but then also the background is out of focus. And what's behind her? What do you think's behind her?
No.
It looks like a rock wall or something.
Yeah, it's a wall of the villa. So, and it's not important to my photograph. So I don't need to show my viewer what's back there.
Mhm.
But if there was a butterfly on her finger and I wanted to photograph the butterfly plus the statue's face and put them both in focus. Now, instead of my 5.6, I used 5.6 here. Instead of my 5.6, then I would need to maybe go to an f6.8 or even an 8. And in that case, then that background's going to come more into focus. The foreground's going to come more into focus. And so at that point, then I'm going to sacrifice not being able to completely blur out that background. So there's trade-offs that we've got to make, but it's you designing your photograph to decide how much we're going to put in focus and how much we're not going to put in focus. Look at this little girl. If you look really closely, eyes are in focus, mouth is in focus. She's about 2 years old, so she's a pretty little one. But if you look closely, you'll see that by her ears and her earring, those are already dropping out of focus. You see that? And then what's in the back? What's in the background?
Plants.
Plants, exactly. But you see that I'm not letting you see those. You know what they are, but I don't let you go back there. Because if you go back there, once you look at the little kid and the kid's not yours or you're not interested in the kid, then you're immediately back in that background looking at pots and plants. And same thing, if you've been shopping for pots or plants lately, I've lost you, you're in the background. So I've made sure that my background is nice and soft and that the only thing you're looking at is her. And then that just keeps the viewer's eye right there on the little girl. So this is about a 3.5. And also, if you've ever watched photographers work, you watch photographers move around to get their background like they want it. So in this case, when I first saw her, I got down low to shoot straight across at her, and then I moved ever so slightly so that there was nothing close to her. The further the background is from the subject, the more you can blow it out of focus. So photographers often position ourselves so that we're 8 or 10 feet, so that our subject is 8 or 10 feet from the background. Yes, Richard.
You said the f-stop was 3.5?
Out of 3.5, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
On some of the lenses, the f-stop doesn't go any lower than like F or 5.6.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll get to that. Right now, I just need you to know the theory of what those f-stops are.
got you.
And so here, for instance, with the little girl on the swing, you see she's in a garden, you know she's on a swing, but that's not really important. And 20 years after you take the photo, that's the swing's not important and the garden's not important. What's important is her and her little being right now. So that background in this case, putting that background 8, 10, 15 feet away from the subject allows us to blow that background out of focus easier. The closer the background is, the harder it's going to be to blow it out of focus. Further away it is, the better it's going to be. So simply now, by just focusing on her and letting that background be as far away as possible, I chose where I take her picture so that we've got a good clean background behind us so that I can blow it out of focus.
You zoomed in on this, didn't you?
Yeah. So your f-stop 4 or 22. Same
4.
place of focus. So 22. Whoops, I'm sorry. Go back. 22 and 4. So I'm balancing the light meter each time. The light is exactly the same each time, but the physics of my light change. So if you're trying to convey this photograph with an f4, or you're trying to convey this photograph with an f22.
Oh.
So what are you trying to convey? What are you trying to communicate to your viewer? F4 or F22? So each one of them,
F4.
the light is right, but they're different. So you like the F4 better, Richard?
I think it's more artistic.
Yeah, yeah. So with the crystal ball, remember I told you about my crystal ball photography. This is an F4 and this is an F22. So once again, what are you trying to communicate and how do you want to convey this scene to your viewer? Do you want them to see the edge of the crystal ball in nice clear focus, or do you want them to see the edge of the crystal ball not so clear and the background not so clear?
I
So
think
the f-stop you choose is totally up to you based on how you balance your light meter. So you're at f5.6 right now, correct?
yes.
Okay, put your camera in your hands. And now look through your viewfinder and push your button halfway down so that it turns everything on, because the camera goes to sleep after a short period of time. Okay, so now when you're looking through that viewfinder, I want you to rotate your f-stop dial. So Melissa, that was your back big dial. You can rotate that one. And Richard, yours was your front dial, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. What's the smallest f-stop you can get?
3.5.
3.5. Good. What's the smallest f-stop you can get, Melissa?
4.5.
4.5. Good. So if you would zoom your lens, take your hand and zoom that lens. Now, what's the smallest f-stop you can get?
6.3.
6.3.
5.6.
5.6. Zoom it back the other way and you'll see you can go to those small numbers again. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's because these are, you all own variable f-stop lenses. So if that lens only went to say f4, and that was as small as it got, and whether you zoomed or not, you could still only go to f4, then that would make that lens much heavier, and that would make that lens much more expensive. Now, go back and look through your viewfinder again, and what's the biggest f-stop you can get?
Okay.
Don't zoom yet,
Oh,
Richard.
I'm sorry.
What's the biggest f-stop you can get?
22.
22, good. What's the biggest f-stop you can get, Richard?
I actually turned it off. F22.
22, good. Zoom, can you get us a new bigger f-stop?
Okay. One, F20, it's still F22.
It's still 22.
I'm at 36.
Yours is 36. Try again, Richard. Zoom it the other direction. Can you go to 36?
Oops, oh, shoot. I'll turn it off.
Turn it
now.
off again.
Yeah, it's the dial's real close to the aperture.
Yeah.
Actually, no, it only goes to F22.
It only goes to f22. Okay, good, good. So these are called variable f-stop lenses. And your f-stop, remember, is your aperture in your lens. So your f-stops are all based on your lens. So if you have another lens in your bag, don't go get it right now. But if you have another lens in your bag, you want to test it because it also will have a smaller f-stop. If you zoom it, it'll have a smaller f-stop. If you zoom out, it'll have another f-stop. If you zoom out, it'll have another f-stop. So each one of your lenses came with a certain number of f-stops. So your f-stops are totally dependent on your lens. Richard, what lens, what do you have? Look on the top of it or else in the barrel of it. And it's like and Melissa, same thing, 18 to 35 or 18 to 1.
It's 18 to 55.
18 to 55. Good. Okay. What do you have, Richard?
This, and I'm gonna, oh, there it is, 16 to 50 millimeter.
16 to 50?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So each one of those lenses comes with a certain number of f-stops. And so you can't get a smaller f-stop just because of the construction of the lens. So everything is based on your lens with your f-stop, regarding your f-stops, okay? Some of your lenses have come with a 1.4 or a 2.8 or something like that. And you might sometimes be tempted, especially by Instagram pictures, to see that somebody's shooting with a 2.8 or something like that. Richard, you mentioned wanting to do weddings, and there's a lot of the young wedding photographers are out there who are shooting with their 1.4 lenses or 2.8 lenses. It sounds real good. So this is my cat Socks. He just happens to be the only one around most of the time when I need to take a picture. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of pictures of Socks. He doesn't particularly like to have his picture taken, but he's handy sometimes. So this is a 50 millimeter 1.4 lens, and I opened it up to 1.4. So that means, remember I told you 2.8 has about a 1/16 of an inch. Well, 1.4 is even shallower than that. And so to get this photograph with Socks's nose in focus, plus his eye in focus, that's called the depth of field, and it's a flat plane like this. So I had to get his nose and eye lined up in that flat plane to get the nose in focus and the eye in focus. It looks great here, but it took me nearly 50 photos to get it.
Oh my word.
Because the depth of field is so shallow. And so as he moved and as I moved, trying to get everything, him and me, whatever the proper grammar is, trying to get us lined up took nearly 50 photos. And so that shallow depth of field is not something that we would be shooting at, or we should be shooting at. But you notice that the background here is beautiful and creamy and soft. Do you see that? And that's what this lens is known for. And so we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but this is called your bokeh. And so your lens will also have its own kind of signature blurry background. And so depending on what kind of blurry background you want or you're looking for, then that would also depend on what lens you would use.
So this is this not a zoom lens, or it is a zoom lens?
It is a zoom lens because you zoomed it in and out, right?
Well, no, I'm mine. I'm talking about yours, what you took.
Oh, no, this is not a zoom lens. No.
Okay, because there was I noticed on this particular web commercial, this guy was advertising about this lens and it needed an adapter. but it didn't zoom. And it's a set, and 35 millimeter, 1.8.
Yes,
And you mentioned that bokeh, whatever.
yes.
I don't know if this is or not, but you're saying that for that type of lens, it produces what?
A very nice creamy background to it when that background's nice and out of focus, and that's called bokeh. So that's the technical term for it.
Okay.
But that 35 millimeter or 1.8 or whatever, you wouldn't shoot it at 1.8 if you were smart, because your depth of field is just going to be so shallow. So it looks good on Instagram, but if you look at the picture up close, most of your stuff's going to be out of focus. Okay. So look at this photograph, and what f-stop do you think that I'm using?
The lowest.
So like what?
It depends on what your thing goes to.
Make a determination, Richard.
Okay. 1.3.
1.3. Melissa, what f-stop do you think I'm using?
I was gonna go more in the middle, like 4.5 maybe.
Isn't everything in focus? Is everything in focus?
Oh.
No,
I see what you're saying.
It-
Wait a minute.
So
the rocks in focus
the
and
rocks
some of the
focus.
trees.
Yeah,
It's just the water that's not.
it's the water, right, right.
So
But
it's your
if you
shutter
look-
speed.
If you look all the way back to the back, you see that all the bushes and the trees and stuff in the back are in focus. You see that?
Yeah.
And you notice that even up here toward the lower right-hand corner, you notice that the stick with moss on it is in focus.
Okay.
So if I've got that in focus plus the background in focus, probably what's my f-stop?
Well, then it's bigger.
Yeah, bigger. What would it be?
22. I don't know.
22. Just go all the way. So go all the
32.
way to 32 on that one. So yeah,
Well,
you're
but how do you
letting-
get the water like
so
that?
that is something you haven't seen with your real eye, with your eye. So this is the first of the optical illusions that I'll
Okay.
introduce you to.
Okay,
So I'm going to introduce you to that in just a moment when we blur the water. So your f-stop in this case would be like my 32. And so, you know, if I've got a 32, Melissa, you had a 32 on your lens, right?
Yes. uh-huh.
Yeah. So for this type of a shot, when I got to this river in Costa Rica, I immediately thought, okay, this is great. I want all my depth of field, and I want to be able to blur the water, because once you learn how to blur the water, then you always blur the water. And so it's one of those photography things that we do. So once I saw this river, I knew immediately what my photo was going to be. My photo was going to be all my depth of field, and then I wanted to try to blur the water. So I take my camera, my tripod down to the river, put my camera on the tripod, compose up my scene, and set my f-stop for 32. Now I've got to balance my light meter, and we balance our light meter now that we have one number that our brain has selected. We balance our light meter with our shutter speed. So let's go back to your chart, and I want to teach you about shutter speeds. Okay. So we go back to this little chart that I had you draw, and we know already that I'm going to use an f32. So that's an easy one. I just go ahead and I dial in my 32. And when I dial in 32, so set that on my f-stop, now it's time to balance my light meter. Don't do it yet, Richard. I'll get you to do it in just a second.
Okay.
So when I dial in f32 on my camera, and now I have to take my shutter speed dial, your second dial, Richard, your dial on back, Melissa, your dial on the front. Now I have to take my shutter speed dial, and I have to rotate my shutter speed dial until my light meter scale goes right in the middle. And when the light meter scale goes right in the middle, brain has to kick in and say, okay, what's going to happen? I've got an f32. That means I'm going to see all my depth of field in my scene. I've got an 1/8 of a second This row of numbers over here are called shutter speeds. Shutter speeds stop movement. F-stops control how much depth of field we have, how much is in focus and how much is not in focus. Shutter speeds control movement. So 1/8 of a second puts my light meter in the middle if I use my F32. And if you look at your handout that I gave you, I've told you that 1/8 of a second or slower, water blurs. So if I can get 1/8 of a second or slower on my shutter speed, then that means the water is going to blur. And once you learn how to blur water as a photographer, you're always going to blur water because the only people who can blur water are people who know how to do it. So once you learn how to do it, that's it. We blur water every time we see water. So when I look at what the two numbers that balance my light meter, F32 and 1/8 of a second, now I can say, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted my picture to look like. So Melissa, you're standing next to me and you've got an F32, and hypothetically, we're all looking at the exact scene, the exact composition, then you would also get 1/8 of a second on your light meter because it's the same light. But Richard, you said you only had an F22, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so Richard's only got an F22. And we're standing there and we're doing this all together. If Richard dials in an F22, he's going to be able to balance his light meter at a 15th of a second, which is a little bit faster. So he's not going to blur his water. So he's going to be able to balance his light meter at F22 at a 15th of a second for that moment in time. Doesn't work right now, Richard. For that moment in time, that light. And so the reason for that is Richard's lens has a little bit bigger opening. Melissa and I have a little smaller opening. So we can balance our light meter at 1/8 of a second, but Richard can't, but it still balances his light meter. And he's going to say, but wait a second, I can't blur my water. And we're going to say, yeah, exactly right. You can't blur your water. But if we wait about 15 minutes for the sun to go down, then Richard will now be able to get a 22 at 1/8 of a second, and Melissa and I will be at a 32 at a 1/4 of a second. So where our starting point is, that's exactly the same light, but because of different equipment, the picture would end up looking different. But if we went to F16, we would also be able to balance our light meter at a 30th of a second. And if we went to F11, we would balance our light meter at a 60th of a second. And if we went to F8, we would balance at 1/25th of a second. And if we went to 6.8, we could balance at 250. And if we went to 5.6, we could balance at 500th of a second. And that's because each one of these is exactly the same amount of light, a faster shutter speed, bigger opening, or a smaller opening and a longer shutter speed. So the picture would look exactly the same. But what would change was the effect of the blurry water or the not blurry water. So of all these combinations, if you don't know what an F16 and 30th of a second means, or you don't know what an F32 and 1/8 of a second means, or you don't know what a 5.6 at 500th of a second means, then all you're really doing is just balancing your light meter, but you're not designing a photograph. You're not going to where you want to be with your photograph. You're just balancing a light meter. So anywhere you balance the light meter, you're going to get a perfectly exposed image. But is it going to stop the action you want? And is it going to blur out the background you want or not blur out the background? So now you two are learning what these do instead of them just being happy accidents. So let's say, for instance, that I wasn't so much interested in blurring the water, but I was communicating with fly fishermen, people who like to do fly fishing. They're not interested in blurred water. The only people who are interested in blurred water are photographers. But the fly fishermen want to see that turbulent water, and they want to see that water rushing over the rocks that the fish live in. So fly fishermen would want to see a 1/25th of a second at f8. So if I were communicating to anglers, because this is a famous trout fishing stream down in Costa Rica, then I would use a fast shutter speed to show them how turbulent the water is and how beautiful this river is. But you see that my light is exactly the same as in the previous photo. You see that? So 1/8 of a
Did you-
second, f32.
Did you change your photo? Because the water's still blurry.
Yeah, so 1/25th of a second, f8, where the water's turbulent.
Oh, okay, okay.
1/8 of a second,
Ah.
f32, where the water's blurry. You see?
Okay, okay, I see it
So
now.
what are you trying to communicate to your audience? What are you trying to communicate to with your photo? Are you trying to show the turbulence in the water? Or are you trying to be artsy?
Yeah,
Right? But you notice also, look at that stick in the foreground that has the moss on it. You see that stick right down there in the lower right?
right.
When I go to f8, 1/25th of a second, then you see that it's still in focus.
Mhm.
And then look all the way back in the back. You see how it's still in focus back in the back?
Mhm.
And then if I go, this is f8, but if I go 32, it's still in focus back in the back. So your lenses are also your tools. And photographers use certain lenses for landscape photography that have real fat f-stops, unlike that one that I showed you of the cat. So the f-stops are nice and fat. So because of the construction of the lens, I can move between f32 and f8, and you're not going to notice the difference because that's how the lens was constructed. You'll notice it a bit, but not much. And that's so we can use it in our landscape photography more often. So your lenses are your tools. But for right now, I just want you to understand this fatness of your depth of fields, okay? So when you put that scale in the middle, you get a perfectly exposed image. But the numbers that put it in the middle, your brain is the only thing that is going to know whether those are the right numbers or the wrong numbers based on what photograph you're trying to take. So if you look at this picture of Venice, where we can see all the way down the canal, what f-stop do you think I'm using?
22?
Yep, you got it. 22 or 32. Exactly. Now look at the water. See how it's blurry?
Right.
So roughly what shutter speed am I using?
Eighth. Eighth.
Yeah, you don't know exactly. But you can look at this and you can say, okay, she's got about an f32 here and she's got about 1/8 of a second because that water's blurred. And you notice that the people are blurred over on the side.
Mhm.
See
Okay.
that? But you
Yes.
notice the guy with the white bag, you notice how he's not blurred because he's standing in front of that window
With the
looking
light.
at something.
Mhm.
But all the other people going up the little bridge in Venice, you see that they're blurred because the shutter speed wasn't fast enough to stop them. If I used a faster shutter speed, also watch what happens in the photograph. If I used a faster shutter speed, you can see the gondolas in the water.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
But if my shutter speed's too slow, the gondolas disappear.
Oh, my word. Is
And-
that, I mean, and how many seconds apart are we talking about?
So notice the guy with the white bag.
Oh, yep.
Yep. So what happened was I was coming home at night one night in Venice, and I set my tripod up and I did my F-32 and I took my picture, and then I noticed, oh Lord, the gondolas disappeared. Teaching moment, take a quick picture, speed up that shutter speed. But you see the lights exactly the same.
Oh, and he had moved. The
He
one,
hadn't moved. So
yeah,
if you don't use a fast enough shutter speed, then your movement, anything that's moving is going to blur. So where you originally think, I want to use F-32 to see all the way down the canal. Well, you know what? I also have to pay attention to my shutter speed if there's movement in the photograph. So in this case, to show you the gondolas, the shutter speed took preference and I had to give up my f-stop.
however, whenever you slowed down the shutter speed, you took the noise out of the picture.
No,
Right.
not really.
Well, I'm talking about the activity.
No, I took away the movement inside of the photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not the noise so much. Yeah. Yeah. But I'm creating a different photo is what I'm doing. So I'm creating
Exactly.
something different. Okay. But you notice that the light's exactly the same. So that's from balancing the light meter. And
But
then
to
you
me,
notice
that first picture is prettier.
this one,
Yes, that's beautiful.
you like that one better?
Yes.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
seems quieter.
Uh-huh.
It's more serene.
Yeah. So it depends on what you're trying to communicate, what you're trying to do. And you notice on this one where I did stop the gondolas, see this guy's foot is slightly out of focus.
Exactly.
And also this sailor over here who is probably walking pretty fast. Then he's a little bit out of focus.
Okay, so what's the speed on this?
About
Right now?
120, about 125th,
122?
125th.
125.
So about 125th of a second. Okay. So now what I want you to do, you all are all still at f5.6, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I want you to put your camera in your hands, and I just want you to point your camera either out the window or at a lamp in the room, something that's bright. So the sun's kind of gone down in our area a little bit, but just point your camera at a lamp in the room. And you're at f5.6, correct?
Oh,
Wait, nope.
no, I'm at 22 now.
No, put it on 5.6 for me if you would.
Okay.
And now rotate the shutter speed until the scale goes right in the middle. Just look through the viewfinder and rotate the shutter speed until the scale goes right in the middle. And when the scale goes right in the middle, take the picture, click, and tell me what shutter speed you got.
There we go. Say it's pretty dark in my room, but I got it.
What'd you get, Melissa?
I was just saying it was really dark in my room, so
Yeah,
I'm having to do quite a bit.
so rotate that shutter speed, and when it goes right in the middle, take the picture and tell me what shutter speed you got. Good, I heard you all click. What shutter speed did you get?
Mine showed 5.
5, good. 1/5 of a second, what'd you get, Richard?
1/20th, but the thing is my ISO is set on automatic. So
I want your ISO, do this for me, please. This was in your handout that I want you to
Okay.
get your camera set up. Set your ISO to 100 Melissa and 200 Richard.
okay. So, oh, that's right. It's exposure.
Okay,
To 100, is that what you said?
yes, your ISO.
I'm gonna have to
Right.
go.
And I'll explain ISO to you in just a moment. Okay, so
Oh,
now point your camera just in something in the room, just anything. No lamp or anything bright. And f5.6, what shutter speed do you get? And take the picture.
Ooh, that was 2 seconds.
2 seconds, good, and take the picture.
I did.
Good. Now point your camera, Melissa, down at something that's dark. Richard, catch up with us when you can, okay?
okay.
Something that's dark.
Point your camera like, down to the floor.
Okay.
So Richard, point your camera anywhere in the room at f5.6 and just put the scale right in the middle and then point. Go ahead.
It was set on 100, but then it flipped back to, I've still got it on automatic, and I'm having a hard time finding it.
Okay.
Okay.
And then Melissa, when you balance your light meter and look at something dark, what number did you get?
Still going. 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Good. That was long. It
very
was really
dark.
dark down there. Yeah. Okay. Now, Melissa, pull those pictures up on the back of your camera.
Okay, now.
Now you're ready, Richard. Just point it and balance your light meter. Melissa, pull that picture
Oh,
up on the
God.
back of your
Okay.
camera, or those 3 pictures. They don't look good, but does the light look like it does in your room?
Yes.
Yay.
Okay, there we are.
Good, good. Congratulations, Melissa. Pat yourself on the back. You've now balanced your light meter. Yeah. So Richard, you just balanced it. Now pull that picture up on the back of the camera. And does it look like it does in that room?
Yes, it does.
Yay. Same thing. Pat yourself on the back. You've now balanced your light meter. So when I say balance your light meter, you're putting that scale in the middle. But the numbers you use to put that scale in the middle are all based on the photo that you're trying to create. So you have now balanced your light meter. Okay. Richard, pictures look like it did in the room?
Yes.
Yay. Super. Okay. Now let's look at shutter speeds because, oh, first of all, camera's in your hand, right?
Yes.
Okay. Using your shutter speed dial. So Melissa, that's your front dial. Richard, I assume that's your back dial. Using your
Yes.
shutter speed dial, what is the fastest shutter speed you can get? 2,000, 4,000, or 8,000?
Wait just a sec.
Hold on. I
It's
gotta-
getting pretty dark.
No, I don't care what it looks like on the back, Richard. I just want to know what when you rotate your dial, how fast can it go?
Oh, it'll go like fast.
Rotate your dial and tell me how fast it'll go. 6,000, 8,000, 4,000, Melissa?
4,000s.
4,000,
Or four-
Melissa?
I'm going. 8,000.
8,000, okay. Richard, yours goes to 4,000?
Yeah, 4,000s.
4,000, good, okay. Shutter speeds are inside your camera. So when you bought your camera came with a set number of shutter speeds. So Melissa, your fastest shutter speed is 8,000, which is really, really, really fast. And Richard, your fastest shutter speed is 4,000. So we're much more likely to use 4,000 versus 8,000. 8,000 would be a lot of light, a whole lot of bright, sunshiny day. But 4,000 we're more likely to use, but it still would need a really, really bright, sunshiny day. Now keep rotating that shutter speed dial the opposite direction. And when do you get your first quotation marks? So
where do you?
1 with quotation marks or 2 with
Oh, I see what you're saying.
quotation marks. Melissa, yours would be maybe 0.3 with quotation marks. What's the first number you get with quotation marks?
0.3.
0.3. Richard?
I get 1.
1. Okay. Once you see quotation marks with a whole number, that means we're into seconds. So the way that Canon does it, Melissa, is that 0.3 with quotation marks is 1/3 of a second, but you also have a 3. So you have a 3 and you have a 0.3 with quotation marks. Both of them are 1/3 of a second. It doesn't matter which one you use, they're both the same. And then Melissa, if you keep rotating your dial, you'll see that you finally go to like 2 seconds with quotation marks, 2 with quotation marks.
You mean us go as far as it'll go?
No, don't go all the
Or
way. I
keep
just want
going?
you to go to where a whole number with quotation
Oh,
marks.
whole number. Sorry.
Yeah.
A 1.
One with quotation marks, good. And then just kind of slowly keep rotating in that direction. And Richard and Melissa, you'll both notice that you get 5 with quotation marks, you get 10 with quotation marks, 8 with quotation marks, and then you finally get to 30 with quotation marks.
Wow.
Yeah.
You see
30
that?
seconds exposure. Is it bad to let that much light in?
Nah,
Oh,
no,
okay.
never. The camera's designed for it. Now, where I said you wouldn't use your 8,000 very often, Melissa, and that really with 4,000, we would have to have a whole lot of light. So we may not use those really, really, really fast shutter speeds that the camera has, but those 1 second, 2 second, 5 second, 10 second, 15 second, 30 seconds, we're going to use those all the time. We get some great photos with those. The camera has to be on a tripod, obviously, but we get some amazing pictures with those long shutter speeds. So the shutter speeds you have are in your camera body. If you change lenses, then your f-stops might change, but your shutter speeds will still stay the same. So when you bought your camera body, it came with a certain number of shutter speeds. So shutter is in your camera and f-stop is in your lens. Okay. So of all those shutter speeds that you have on your handout, I have given you 5 shutter speeds that we're going to work on tonight, because you see that you have a ton of shutter speeds to work with. So I'm going to give you 5 tonight, and they're kind of benchmarks. So if you know you want to do something, then you would set your shutter speed on that. So 1/8 of a second, you know already that water blurs at 1/8 of a second, right? So you know that one. Looking at your handout again, 1/15 of a second is if you have gentle movement. 1/15 of a second is if you have gentle movement. So for this picture of this red bud branch, I look through the viewfinder. I have an idea of what my picture needs to look like or what I want my picture to look like. But the red bud branch is gently swaying in the breeze. So now, since there is movement in the picture that I want to stop, the first number I dial in is my shutter speed. Shutter speed stops movement. So if there's movement in my picture that I want to stop, now I dial in my 1/15 of a second first. And then I follow with whatever f-stop will put the scale right in the middle. So if there's movement in the scene that you want to stop, the first number you dial in is going to be your shutter speed to stop that movement. Then you follow with your f-stop to balance your lightning. And then you determine whether that one's good or not for what you're trying to create.
So it really just depends on your what you're trying to shoot
Yep,
as to which one you focus on first.
you've got it. Absolutely
Okay.
right. Absolutely right. So with the picture of Socks the cat, he's moving. Now he's not walking or anything, but he's just looking at me and he's moving his head back and forth and he's blinking his eyes. So if you have a living creature in your photograph or a living human being in your photograph, then that's blinking eyes, moving head, talking, smiling, then you need at least a 60th of a second shutter speed. So you dial in your 60. And then you follow with whatever f-stop, put your light meter in the middle. So if you have moving subjects, then you have to dial in your shutter speed that's fast enough to stop the movement. So a living, breathing, blinking eyes, moving head, laughing, smiling, you need at least a 60th of a second. Now, not a 2-year-old toddler bouncing up and down, but we need that 60th of a second just looking at us. We need a 60th of a second for that, okay? And then you notice in this photograph that Socks's eyes are in focus. Humans do not like it if the eyes are not in focus. So if the eyes are in focus, then we always have to make sure that the eyes are the focus point. So Melissa, earlier you asked me, how do you know where to focus on? Okay. So I'll start with Melissa first on her camera. Melissa, on the back of your camera, if you would push the topmost right-hand button. It's this one right here, Melissa. Topmost right-hand button, and right above it is a rectangle with a bunch of little dots in it.
Yep.
You see that? When
Mhm.
you push that button, then there should be a screen that pops up on your back display panel.
Yeah.
Now with it'll stay on for about 20 seconds. With your front dial, you can go horizontal or vertical. With your back dial, you can go horizontal or vertical. And so yeah, I'm not sure whether it's horizontal or vertical on your camera, but when you push that button, that topmost right-hand button, and then you rotate your front dial, the focus points will move around, and the back dial, the focus points will move around. And Melissa, you see that sort of toggle wheel in the middle of your back wheel? You can push that vertically and your focus point will now move vertically.
Okay.
You see that?
Yep.
So when you're taking a picture with your camera, Melissa, you're looking at the subject through the viewfinder, and then you flick that topmost right-hand button, and then you need to get good enough to know that I need to move the focus point over to the side because the kid you want to photograph is over at the side.
Okay.
So it's just a skill that you have to develop with your back thumb. And after a while, you won't even think about it. Richard, your screen on the back has a touch screen, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if you're going to hold, I've been noticing you're holding the camera out. If you're going to hold the camera out, which is going to be a little bit slower than if you held it to your to your eye, then you can touch the back of the camera, your display panel, and it will set your focus point to there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, if you're looking through your viewfinder, you're going to have to do the same thing, but you're going to have to set your camera to one focus point.
That's the way I have it.
And then when you have that one focus point, your front dial or your back dial will allow you to move your focus point around.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Now, when you say focus point, metering and focus point are two different things.
Two different things completely. You're metering off the scene, and then you're focusing on your subject. The last thing you're going to do is focus on your subject.
Okay. One controls the light focus,
Uh-huh.
and the other one controls the focus.
One controls the light in the entire photograph, and one
Right.
controls what you focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, on your camera also, under your FN button, do you have an FN button up on the top? Do you have an FN button on the front disc on right where your index finger is when you take the picture? Do you have an FN button?
I don't know. It
No?
would say FN.
Uh-huh.
I don't think so.
Okay. So look for this later on, but you might have something that kind of looks like this.
Okay.
And I suspect it's, now I figured out where it is on that camera. It is on your back display panel. Let me find a camera that looks like yours. Right there. Never mind. You'll find it. You'll find it. It's on the handout that I sent you all. But you can, same thing, Richard. You can focus with a large square, a medium-sized square, a bunch of small squares, or just one square.
I like the one square.
So the one square to me is always the way to go. But if I were photographing brown pelicans flying along the beach, then I might use a big square. if I were photographing a very small bird in dense foliage and I didn't want the leaves to distract the focus point, I would use just one square. And I would put that square where I needed it to be. So in this lioness, for instance, we're in Africa and she's right in front of my Land Cruiser. And so I'm looking straight down on her head. And my guide tells me when she raises her head up, she's going to hear the male lion roar and she's going to immediately walk away. You're going to have just a very small moment of time when she raises her head up to get your picture. So knowing that when I'm kind of gauging, when she raises her head up, I'm realizing with my lens, she's going to fill the frame with her head. So I put my focus point right up here on the top. I activate that focus point. So Melissa, you see how you can activate one focus point when you
Yes.
move your thumb around? So I'm just looking down at her head, but I go ahead and I activate my top focus point. And that way, when she starts to raise her head up, I already have the focus point up at the top of the frame activated. So then I just have to do a little fine tuning and get my focus point right where I want it to go. So your focus is a different thing besides just getting your exposure. So now we're perfecting that photo even more by making sure that we're focused on the right thing. If in this photo, all of the focus points were activated, one of those sprigs of grass might have grabbed the focus away from me. And then I wouldn't have my focus on the lion anymore. My focus would be grabbed away by the grass. And so that's the reason why I don't use all the focus points, because then anything that moves is going to grab one away. So something that you've got to work on. So guy in the parade, up on the horse, focus point up on the top once again, so that I can get his face in focus. And then his hand doesn't grab my focus and take my focus away from him. So this man on the horse walking in a parade, look at your handout. This is 2/50th of a second, 250th of a second. So trotting, fast walking, slow running, that's about 250th of a second. So we've got to have that shutter speed set to be able to stop this guy in the parade. 250th of a second will stop the little kid on the swing. So he's not a big kid, he's only a 4-year-old, so he's a little guy, not swinging real big like a teenager. So all I'm doing now is making sure I've got at least a 250th of a second, but whatever f-stop balances my light meter is what I have to accept, because I need that 250 to stop his movement. Now notice also with this photograph that I've got that blurred out background back there. See that? So I've selected where I'm going to take the photographs. If you have to let the little kid wear himself out on the other stuff, but I've selected where I'm going to take the photograph to give myself that beautiful blown out background back there. And then just simply swing the kid, take my hand, put it on my camera, focus point on his face, click, 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 click as he swings, swing him again, put my hand back on my camera, focus point on his face, click, 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 click. Okay? So shutter speed stops movement. Blue-gray tanager down in Costa Rica, fairly slow moving bird, so I don't need a whole bunch of shutter speed for it. But I noticed that I've got this beautiful blown out background. And so now I'm going to move the bird over ever so slightly. There's a feeder right underneath him there that you can't see. So I know he's going to turn upside down and drop down to that fruit feeder. But now by using that focus point off to the side, it creates a photo that's a little bit more artistic than if the bird's always in the middle of the frame. We had a wedding in the family a couple of years ago. And of course, me as the photographer, I'm not the photographer at the wedding, but I'm of course looking over the shoulder of the photographer. And I noticed that she's shooting on program mode, and she is shooting on auto ISO, and she is shooting with one focus point in the center activated, which means when I'm looking at all the photos from there on from the wedding, the center of the frame is always where the focus point is, which is awfully dull and awfully boring in photography. So being able to move those focus points around lets us be a better photographer. So 2/50th of a second. And then we get to more fast movement, like 500th of a second. So in this case, the whale fluking up like this, not the real quick movement, but the fluking up and then sliding below the water, 500th of a second. And notice that the water spray now behind the whale, you see how the water spray is now nice and crisp balls of water. See that? So water forms balls at 500th of a second. So if I want to freeze the water, then I know that I need 500th of a second or faster than that. If I want to blur the water, then I need 1/8 of a second or slower than that. So in this case with the whale, trying to get a fast enough shutter speed, I know that at 500th of a second, I may not be able to stop all the action that I want, but when he flukes up and then slides down into the water, I can stop the water spray behind him. Shutter speed making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now the last component is ISO. Remember I told you it was light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. So ISO is how fast your sensor is recording light. In the old days with film, it was how fast the chemicals reacted to light. Today, it's how fast the sensor is recording light. Your ISO is best for Richard's camera at 200, and Melissa, your ISO is best at 100. Nikon engineered their cameras to be the best ISO at 200, and Canon engineered theirs to be the best at ISO 100. If you raise your ISO above your 200 or 100, for each increment that you raise your ISO higher, you are degrading the quality of the picture. So if you move from 200 to 400, you've slightly degraded the quality of the picture. If you move from 400 to 800, you're degrading it even more. If you move from 800 to 1600, you're degrading it even more. But in the event that I need a fast enough shutter speed to stop the action that I'm trying to photograph, then sometimes my only alternative is to raise my ISO. So here we are out in the Sahara Desert doing a photo workshop where we're going to photograph the stars out in the Sahara Desert. So we're spending a couple of nights out in the Sahara Desert, and the men have fed us, and now we're waiting for the sun to go down so we can start photographing the stars. And we're going to sleep in these tents in the background. And don't feel totally sorry for me, because in that tower is a flush toilet. So this isn't, you know, I mean, we're roughing it, but I'm not totally roughing it. But the guys are playing the drums, and I'm not going to miss this photo. So I put my camera on my tripod. The things that are solid, like the tents and the tower and the rugs and the fire and all that stuff, you know, with the camera on the tripod, they're not moving, so they're going to stay nice and solid. But the men, as they're playing their drums, they're weaving back and forth, and they're getting into the groove of the music and everything, and they're wiggling. So I need a faster shutter speed to be able to stop them from wiggling. So I have to end up raising my ISO to 3200. And I'm using Canon, so my base ISO is 100. So by raising my ISO to 3200, I'm degrading every single increment that I go up, I'm degrading the quality of my photograph. So it doesn't look bad, but if you look at it, the guys are okay, but the hands are gone. And if you blow it up to 100%, all of that pixelation in there is the noise. So this is what I'm talking about, noise. I can never recover those hands unless I went even higher with the ISO, but I can take the photograph into Lightroom or Photoshop and do noise reduction, and I can make it look better. Did y'all just see the change?
Yep.
So I can do denoise to make it look better, but I can never recover the lost blurry hands. So in the event you can't get a fast enough shutter speed for whatever you're trying to photograph, then you can raise your ISO. So that's the beauty now of having that ISO that we can raise. So in this photograph of a jaguar down in the Pantanal of Brazil, after my second trip down there, I traded in both my Canon cameras and bought high-end Canon cameras because I was shooting at such high ISOs. And with my new mirrorless cameras, I can shoot at even higher ISOs. So you two both have high-end cameras. So you can shoot at fairly high ISOs, but it depends on the quality you're looking for, because you just saw what happened if I blew that up. But if the light is pretty good, like it is here on this Jaguar, then you're not going to notice the high ISO as much. If the light is bad, like it was around that campfire, then you're going to notice the high ISO even more. So this one with this Jaguar, we're in a boat. There's 12 of us in a boat. The boat's got a motor on it. I've got a boatman that's standing up in the back trying to keep the boat steady. But 12 photographers are jostling around trying to get this picture of the Jaguar, and the Jaguar is walking in the shade, so it's not even in the sunshine, and so we've got to keep moving. So I've got to have a shutter speed in the 2,000 to 4,000 range just to get a clear photo of this Jaguar. So this ISO is in the 5,000, if not 10,000 range. But it all depends on your tolerance and then also the quality of light. So if the light is good, like in this shop display in Florence, if the light is good, then you're not going to notice a high ISO as much. If the light is bad, then you're going to notice a high ISO. So to get the two kids playing on their cell phone, if I would have picked my camera up and started fiddling with my camera, they would have noticed what I was doing and we would have lost the moment. So this is simply keeping my camera on the table in front of them. And then I'm using my live view on the back display panel, raising my ISO to give myself at least a 60th of a second because they're breathing, they're moving. And then when I got at least a 60th of a second with my light meter balanced, put that focus point on their faces and then just start shooting. So we can use that ISO, high ISO when we need it. Otherwise, keep it low. So only raise it when you need it and be very conscious about where you raise it and what you raise it to. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So shutter speed. What shutter speed do you think I'm using?
500.
500th of a second? Why do you think 500, Melissa?
Because you've got to catch that lightning.
Got to catch the lightning. What do you think I'm using, Richard?
250.
250? Okay. Both wrong. 30 seconds. 30 with 2 quotation marks. And I'm doing 30 seconds because as the light moves across the sky, if I used a fast shutter speed, I'd only capture a little segment of it. And I want to capture it as it goes across the sky. So it's 30-second.
So you set it up on a tripod, you click, and you just let it go.
Right.
Wait a
I've
minute.
always wondered how to do that.
Yes, that's how to do that.
Not
Yeah.
130, but
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Dang.
Exactly. So if
I just don't see how you keep it from getting blurry, but
because the camera's on the tripod, nothing's moving except the lightning. That's the
Hmm.
only thing that's moving.
Man, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I knew that the camera could do that, but I'm saying,
yeah. Yeah, come back for my night photography class. Yep. You'll figure out, yeah, I'll teach you how to do it. So come back for one of the night classes and I'll teach you how to do it.
all right,
So with the Acrobat, am I using a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed?
fast.
Fast. What do you think? How fast, Richard?
1/500th of a second.
500th? What do you think, Melissa?
I don't know. Sure.
500th of a
250,
second?
500, yeah.
Okay, so this is your 4,000th of a second shutter
Wow.
speed.
Okay.
So if you look at it, I'm on an island in the Aegean Sea out in Greece, and I noticed this acrobat who's just like flipping and twisting and turning, and she's just doing all these amazing things. And I asked her if I could photograph her, and she said, sure. So what do? I'm thinking, oh yeah, 500 or 1,000. So I set it, 500 or 1,000, and then I tell her, okay, 1, 2, 3, go. And she starts flipping, and I'm not even being able to follow her because I have no idea what she's doing. And then I asked her, would you please do that again? Not telling her I just messed all that up. And then when I watched her do it again, I knew good and well this was going to need easily 4,000. So I took it all the way up to 4,000. And then while I watched her flip around, then I got it. So the more you know your subject and the more you know what your subject is going to do, the better photographer you're going to be because you know what to anticipate. So this is that 4,000th of a second shutter speed. You're in something like one of these gymnasiums where the kids are doing their thing. Now, I could raise my ISO, but remember, the worse your light is, the worse your picture's going to look. So out there on that GNC, on the Acrobat, I had plenty of light. So everything was going to look okay to get my 4,000th of a second. I could easily get that. But you go in one of these gymnasiums and the light's not that good. So if I raise my ISO too high, then my picture's just going to look really bad. It's going to look all grainy and stuff. So in this case, I balanced or steadied the camera on my knees, kept my camera nice and steady. I should have had a tripod, but I just kept it nice and steady. And I realized that the girls were getting points for standing still and then throwing colorful objects in the air. So if I use a slower shutter speed, like a 20th of a second, then the flags blur and I get a little bit of creativity in my picture. So we don't always have to stop every movement in a photograph. So sometimes the movement in the photograph conveys to our people who are watching or looking at our photograph, conveys how much movement we've got. So it's not important that we freeze everything, but it is important that we get the exposure right. And in this case, if you look at the photograph, these teenagers in the background that are totally enthralled with this dance, you can tell they're thrilled to be there. All I need is a 60th of a second to stop them. But, my dancers in the front, I need maybe 1/25th of a second. It's stage lights, the lights of San Jose, Costa Rica in the background. I got plenty of light. So I don't need to raise my ISO really, really high because I don't need a super high shutter speed. So the last thing that I'm going to leave you with before I send you off to do your homework and then see you next week, pull one of those pictures up on the back of your camera. And then Melissa, push your info button 1 time or 2 times until you see your histogram. And Richard, you pull your picture up on the back of your camera, and I think you toggle up 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times. I didn't know your camera once again, so I can't tell you exactly how to do it.
Oh, I see it.
You see it? So when you're looking at your picture, you can also see the histogram right next to it. You see that?
I see it.
No,
So-
I'm sorry. I'm not catching
Pardon?
it.
So pull your picture up on the back of your camera.
Oh, my picture. That's why.
Yeah, pull your
Okay.
picture up on the back of
there
your
it is,
camera.
yeah.
Yeah, and now push the info button 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times to see the histogram. Okay. Now, this is how you check to see whether the exposure you got is really right or not. Melissa, notice also that you might have something that's blinking on your photograph.
Mm-mm.
Or have you ever seen that where you've got something that's blinking on your photograph?
I have, and I've
you
noticed it
have?
all the time. I'm not quite sure what's going on.
Good, good. Melissa, go to that picture you took of your light bulb, I think, and then see where your histogram is, and then you have your, it's blinking at you on your picture.
I don't see anything blinking.
You don't see anything blinking. Go to your, push your menu button and go to your blue menu. And either your first or your second blue menu should say histogram on it. Your first item should be histogram.
Okay.
And highlight indicator, do you see highlight indicator underneath that?
I see histogram RGB.
Yeah, and then underneath that, do you see highlight indicator?
No, it says image jump, slideshow.
Okay, 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 but nothing where it says highlight indicator?
No.
Okay, so make a note, Melissa, and find
There's
your
highlight alert.
highlight alert.
Uh-huh.
That's what you
And
want.
it says disabled.
Turn it on.
Okay.
That's
got
why you've never seen it.
Okay.
So you turned it on?
Yes.
Okay, now go back to that picture and pull that up again and pull up your histogram. And now you should notice that you've got something blinking in there, or you might have something blinking in there.
Oh, wait. Yes, I think I do.
Yeah.
On my histogram, I don't have anything flashing.
Right. Yours is on your next screen. So on your next screen, Nikon makes them two separate screens. So you've got your picture with your histogram, and then you've got your picture with anything blinking.
Okay. The ISO on, okay, before the one I have is ISO set at 100. Okay, but then when I go to 1250, it's red.
No. When you pull your picture up on the back of your camera.
Right.
And once again, I didn't know what camera you had, so I can't help you out like I can, Melissa. When you see the histogram, right?
Yes.
Okay, so make a note that to go into your menu and turn on your highlight indicator. And it's on the first handout that I gave you. There's some instructions on how to turn it on for Nikon, but don't do it right now because I would just want to show you what your highlight indicator is. Okay, so just make a note to go turn it on. So Melissa and Richard, both of you all look at this photograph of the cat on the couch.
Okay.
And up here in the top left-hand corner, there is, when I took the picture, there was a sun coming through that top left-hand corner. That sun coming through the top left-hand corner, I know that that is going to turn into a blink for me, a highlight indicator showing me that I have overexposed that sun. The histogram also tells me that. Your histogram is the left is your blackest black color and your right is your whitest white color. And your histogram is if you took this picture of the cat on the couch, turned it into black and white, and now started separating all of your black colors and your white colors and your gray colors and everything else. And then we graphed them out. So what a histogram is showing you is this is how many black pixels I have, and this is how many really white pixels I have. I don't care about your histogram going up and down throughout it. What I do care about and we care about is that your histogram should begin on the left side with blacks, and it should end on the right side with whites, and it should not spike up the right side. So if you look at your histogram and you see a spike up the right side, you are going to also have a corresponding blink at you on your finished picture. Wherever it is blinking, it is destroyed. You cannot fix it later on in Photoshop or Lightroom. So go look back at the photo that I've got on the screen. The first time I took it, I intentionally composed it so that the sun is coming through the top right-hand corner. And then I balanced my light meter and then focused on the cat. And I took the picture. And the histogram over on the top is the histogram that I saw. And blinks, it was blinking in the corner where the sun was. It was blinking on the floor, telling me I'd overexposed the floor. It was blinking on the couch, telling me I'd overexposed the couch. And it was blinking on the cat. So I took the picture a second time, and trusting my histogram as my guide, I did not balance the light meter, but I balanced it one stop to the negative, one large bracket negative, because this scene was too bright for my camera to handle. So I recomposed, focused on the cat again, took the picture. Second picture, pulled it up on the back of my camera, looking for my highlight indicator and my histogram. Top corner left is still blinking at me because I know that's going to be. Floor now doesn't blink, couch doesn't blink, but the interior of the cat fur blinks, meaning there's no detail in the cat's fur. So I took the picture a second time, third time now, and instead of balancing the light meter, I went 2 stops underexposed, 2 large brackets underexposed, and then focused on the cat. And then I got my histogram like I wanted it, because only the area going up in the top left-hand corner was blinking at me. And I didn't show you that histogram. So I just show you the first bad histogram. So anytime we have blinks in the picture and the spike is going up the right side of the histogram, that is a definite sign that we need to rephotograph that and not balance the light meter in the middle, but go slightly toward the negative. How much toward the negative? It depends on how much is blinking. The histogram on the bottom, see how it's not going all the way over to the right-hand side? So I should have rephotographed that and overexposed. So you trust your histogram. Richard, you can see your histogram when you're taking your picture because you're a mirrorless camera. Melissa, you can't. So you have to just develop a kind of a sixth sense. You have to look at a shot like this and say, whoa, this is going to be tricky. Let me take a test shot and see where I stand. Test shot, look at your histogram, look at your highlight indicator, and now that'll show you how much you need to underexpose. Okay.
When I said something was flashing, it was my ISO that was flashing.
Yeah. So go back to my handout and I tell you how to turn on your highlight indicator on a Nikon so you can see it. Okay. So this is when we pull up our picture after we've already taken it, so we can see what we overexposed and what we blew. Because any place that's blinking at you, you ruined it. There's no recovery. So you photograph a bride with a wedding dress and the wedding dress is blinking at you. There is no detail in the wedding dress. Okay. So I look at Richard and I see that shiny surface of your head. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I photographed you and that shiny head was blinking, there's nothing up there. So I cannot recover anything later on in Lightroom or Photoshop. So at the end of your handout, you have 2 homework assignments, one using your f-stop and one using your shutter speed. Cameras on a solid surface like a tripod or a stool if you want to. Follow the directions, and one of them will lead you through the exercise to test your f-stops, and one of them will lead you through an exercise with running water to test your shutter speeds. If you do it right, all the pictures will have the same exposure, but what you'll notice is the background getting softer on the first one and your water blurring on the other one, because one of them will work on water blurring and one of them will work on your background. Read the instructions And if it turns out, by the way, on the one with the, because we're in summer right now, if it turns out with the one with the water that you can't get as slow a shutter speed as I want you to get because you're doing it in the bright sunlight, consider doing it in the shade or else later toward the afternoon when maybe the sun's not so bright. Because right now in
What
the
if you use
summer,
filters?
huh?
What if you use filters?
Don't use any filters, just keep it straight for right now. Let me teach you the basics and then you can pull out your gadgets, okay?
Okay,
Tomorrow, when I send you a recording, I'm going to also send you a link to a Dropbox and you can put your photos, your homework photos in a Dropbox. And then when you put them in the Dropbox, then I can look at them and then I can share them with class next week when we come back together next week, okay?
okay.
So any
Okay.
questions before I leave you?
No, but if we have questions before next week, can we email you?
You can, I'm here. Just email
Okay.
me. I'm around. And as soon as I see your email, I'll reply to you. Okay.
Okay, very
Okay.
good.
And then I will also send you the link to next week's class because I have a different link for every one of the classes. So sometime like, what are we? We're a Wednesday class. So on Tuesday, look for an email from me and it'll have the new link for next week's class. Okay.
Okay, and then also, you said you were recording this. Are you
I'm
gonna send
recording
us
it. So-
the recorded version?
Yep. So tomorrow I'll share the recorded version with you and
Okay.
also a link to the Dropbox.
Perfect. Okay,
So then you can go back and look at the recording and replay it just in the event you need to, okay?
oh, I'm sure I will.
You might. Okay, good. I'm going to stop recording right now.